The building tells you everything, if you know how to listen. Reynaldo Magpayo had been listening for 6 years. He was on his third clipboard page when he found the discrepancy. 2 liters of Betco floor stripper, concentrated formula, unaccounted for in the quarterly usage log. Not missing. He could see the drum on the shelf, full exactly where it belonged, but absent from the record, which meant someone on the evening rotation had pulled it for a job and failed to log the draw. He made a note in the margin with the same mechanical pencil he'd been using since his 3rd year on Orvala 7, circled it and moved to the next item on the inventory sheet. Floor B2 of the Veth Toran Interspecies Academy smelled the way it always smelled. Chemical clean underneath something older and mineral, the way stone walls smell after decades of proximity to water. The grey water processing unit ran its low, steady hum in the corner. The industrial shelving units, steel, bolted to the wall at 2 points each, load-rated and cross-braced because Ray had done that himself in his 2nd year when he noticed they were swaying, held their inventory in the same order they always held it. Left to right, top shelf to bottom, cleaning agents alkaline to acidic, abrasives, solvents, specialty compounds for the particular flooring types used on each of the 6 floors above him, because floors 2 through 4 had a composite tile that reacted poorly to ammonia concentration above 5%, and floor 6's gymnasium surface required a neutral pH cleaner applied at no more than 30 degrees C or the anti-skid coating degraded. He knew this because it was his job to know this, and he took his job seriously, which was something people tended to find either admirable or faintly baffling, depending on whether they had ever been responsible for anything that actually mattered. His equipment cage was at the far end of the storage room, a chain-link enclosure, padlocked, that held his personal tool roll, his maintenance manuals, his station-issued tablet that he used primarily for requisition forms and almost never for anything else, and 3 shelves of miscellaneous hardware, fasteners, conduit fittings, pipe clamps, junction boxes, that represented 2 years' worth of small quantity requisitions, filed under the maintenance line item. General building upkeep, incidental components. Nobody had ever asked him what the components were for. Nobody asked the janitor. That was, in his experience, a universal constant across every species he had worked alongside. There was a drawing taped to the inside of the cage door. A child's drawing, crayon on standard assignment paper, that he had peeled off the floor near the floor 3 lockers 2 months ago. He had meant to throw it away. It was still there. He did not look at it. He finished the chemical inventory. He started the equipment check. He did this in order: mop heads first, condition and replacement schedule, then the floor machines, then the hand tools hanging on the pegboard. Because order was the thing that kept a large, complex building running without incident. And he was the reason this particular large, complex building had not had a significant maintenance incident in 6 years. Above him, through the concrete of the B1 crawl space and then the floor deck of the main level, the sounds of the school moved in their usual patterns. He knew them the way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in for years, the particular resonance of the floor 2 corridor when the early classes changed, the hydraulic thud of the cafeteria's walk-in refrigerator sealing itself on the hour, the way the ventilation system shifted tone when the external atmospheric exchanges cycled. He knew which sounds were normal, he knew which sounds were not. The memory surfaced the way it always did, not asked for, not dramatic, just there, the way a splinter surfaces when you press wrong. Transport flight, a cargo configuration facing rearward in the jump seats, everyone's knees almost touching. Efren pulling out his phone, his personal phone, not the mill-issue one, and angling the screen so Ray could see the photo. A small girl. Brown eyes, serious expression, wearing a dress that had a pattern of small yellow flowers that looked hand-sewn. "She looks like you," Ray had said. "Yeah," Efren had said. "Lucky her, right?" They had both laughed. The cargo bay had smelled of JP8 fuel and that particular institutional cleaning product the Corps used on their transport decks. Lucia Bautista had been 3 years old in that photo. She would be 14 now. He had not kept in contact with the family. He had not known how to do that and had decided in the end that his absence was a lesser cruelty than his presence. He set down the clipboard. He stood still. There was something in the building, not a sound, a pressure. Behind his back molars, the way a storm feels before it arrives, a vibration in the bones of his face and in the center of his sternum. He had never felt this before. He had never felt anything like it. He processed this the way he processed all unusual sensory input in unfamiliar environments, which was with complete stillness and total attention, because that was what 11 years in Force Reconnaissance had made automatic in him. When the environment gives you information you don't understand, you stop, you listen, and you do not move until you have categorized the input. He stood for 15 seconds. The sensation did not stop. It was directionless, or rather it was everywhere, as if the building itself were the source, but it was not even. It was stronger in the direction of the stairwell. He went to his equipment cage. He opened the padlock. He began moving through the contents with the same methodical focus he brought to the inventory, except that he was no longer thinking about floor care products. He was thinking about what he had, and what it was good for, and how the building was arranged. The PA system cut, not a stutter, not a malfunction. It cut cleanly, the way a circuit cuts, and the lights on B2 flickered once, just once, as something upstream in the electrical system absorbed a draw it hadn't expected. He heard, or rather stopped hearing, the normal ambient traffic of children moving between early classes on the floors above him. The building went quiet. Not the quiet of an empty building, which has its own texture, its own echo. This was the other quiet. The quiet that comes after presence, not before it. The quiet of a building that is being controlled. He had heard this quiet twice before in his life. Once in a compound in Helmand province during a cordon operation that had gone sideways. Once in the last building, the last operation, the one he did not name. He picked up his mop handle from the pegboard. He unscrewed the mop head with 4 practiced turns. The handle was 60 inches of fiberglass core aluminum alloy, rated to 250 lbs of longitudinal stress. He held it in his right hand, balanced at the grip point he had learned years ago and never unlearned, and he stood at the base of the B2 stairwell and waited. He did not know what was coming. He began preparing for it anyway, because whatever was producing a 17 Hz vibration in the bones of his face did not belong in his building, and that was enough. They came down the stairs like professionals, which they were. Shadow Compact operatives moved with the particular deliberateness of people who had never encountered meaningful resistance from a target location's infrastructure, which was almost everyone they had ever been deployed against. Their operational doctrine was predicated on this: 40 units, 4 waves of 10, neurotoxin fog, phase shift blades, cloaking fields that defeated every sensor array in the Accord. You went in, you killed the guards, and then you killed the target. The maintenance worker's heat signature had registered on approach and been categorized: non-combatant, civilian labor, maintenance designation, no threat assessment required. A man who mopped floors. They came down 2 at a time, as procedure required, and they cleared left and cleared right at the bottom of the stairs, and neither of them found what they were looking for, which was an empty room. What they found instead was the grey water processing unit, humming at a frequency that masked heat signatures within a 3-meter radius, and at the edge of that radius, precisely positioned, the maintenance worker. Ray hit the first one at the articulation point where the upper chest plate met the neck seal. He had spent approximately 8 seconds, while standing still in the equipment cage, identifying the articulation points, the gaps between armor segments, on the cloaked forms that were moving through his building and producing a subsonic vibration he could feel in his fillings. The figures shimmered at the edges. In low light, the B2 lighting he ran at 40%, because full brightness gave him headaches during inventory. The cloaking fields produced a visible edge distortion, a slight wrongness in the way the air sat. 40% lighting was a maintenance worker's preference. It was also, it turned out, the exact threshold at which the Shadow Compact's cloaking technology failed to fully conceal its users from human vision. He was not a ballistic weapon. He was not trying to punch through armor. Force Reconnaissance does not produce men who punch armor. It produces men who find the gap. The mop handle connected with the neck seal articulation point at the full rotational velocity of a man who had been practicing staff work since his second year on Orvala 7. Initially, because the corridors of the maintenance sub-level were exactly the right length. And later because it turned out he missed having something in his hands that required precision. The first operative went down. The second one was already moving, combat-trained, fast, professional. And Ray was not in the same position anymore because he had moved the moment the first strike landed, left toward the grey water unit, keeping the mass of it between himself and the likely response angle. The second operative's weapon discharged into the space he'd been standing in. The wall received it. The wall was not damaged. The weapon, whatever it did not do it to walls. He noted this. Weapons that pass through biologicals, but not structures. Phase shift blades. He had read something about these once, years ago, in an Accord technical brief that had crossed his maintenance tablet by administrative error, and which he had read entirely because he read everything that landed on his desk, out of habit. The second operative moved to the stairwell, retreating, not fleeing, tactical repositioning. And as it moved, it was transmitting. A rapid burst of sound that Ray could not decipher, in a register below his hearing but audible to a device on its wrist. The transmission, as it was later reconstructed from the Shadow Compact's encrypted logs by Imperial analysts, read, "Sub-level is not clear. Terran maintenance worker, non-combatant designation. There is a problem with the designation. Requesting revised threat assessment. The Terran is, it hit Vorketh with a pipe. Vorketh is not responding." A pause of 0.4 seconds. Then command, flat and untroubled. "You are a Shadow Compact operative. A maintenance worker hit your partner with a pipe. Clear the sub-level and report." Ray did not hear this. He was already at his equipment cage, extracting the 36-inch rigid pipe wrench from his tool roll, because the mop handle was a precision instrument and the pipe wrench was not, and there were situations that called for each. He hung the mop handle on the pegboard with the particular care of a man returning a tool to its proper place. He picked up the operative's phase shift blade from where it had fallen. He looked at it for 3 seconds. He set it down. He did not know how it worked, and a weapon you don't understand is a liability, and he was done incurring liabilities he'd been warned about. He went up the stairwell toward floor 1 because the children were above him and he was below them, and that was the wrong arrangement, and he intended to correct it. Wave 2 had secured floor 1 while Wave 1 was still, as far as they knew, clearing B2 and the administrative sub-levels. Standard operational flow. Wave 1 goes low, Wave 2 goes in behind and holds the main level, Waves 3 and 4 ascend to target. The Floor 1 administrative offices had been cleared of personnel using a burst of neurotoxin fog through the ventilation system's main intake. Incapacitating dose, non-lethal. The Shadow Compact preferred to leave civilians alive where possible, a professional courtesy. The main HVAC intake for Floor 1 was in the maintenance corridor off the eastern service door. Ray knew this because he had replaced the intake filter on that unit 11 times in 6 years, and because the service corridor that accessed it was not on any building plan in the station registry because it had been built by him, informally, as part of the B2 renovation project 2 years ago, using conduit fittings and partition materials requisitioned under maintenance line items, because he had noticed that the existing access route to the intake required pulling a ceiling tile in the main administrative corridor during business hours, which meant disrupting foot traffic every time the filter needed changing, and he did not like disrupting foot traffic, and so he had built a better way. He moved through that corridor with a hand truck, which is not a suspicious piece of equipment for a custodial technician to be moving through a maintenance corridor. On the hand truck were 2 drums, a 20-liter drum of Betco brand ammonium-based industrial floor stripper, concentrated formula, and a 10-liter container of Zepp brand sodium hypochlorite bleach at 12.5% concentration. He was wearing his 3M half-mask respirator, which he wore routinely for any chemical work above pH 10 or below pH 4, as per the safety data sheets he had read, memorized and cross-referenced against each other during his first year on the job. The mixture ratio for chloramine gas production from ammonium compounds and sodium hypochlorite was something he knew not because he had planned for this, but because he knew the safety data sheets for every chemical on his B2 shelves by heart, and the SDS for both products contained in their incompatibility sections explicit warnings about what happened if you mixed them. He had read those warnings the way he read everything, completely, and with the understanding that information is always more useful than ignorance, regardless of whether you currently need it. He mixed them at the HVAC intake. He sealed the intake cover behind him with Gorilla Tape, pressing it down at the edges with the heel of his hand, smoothing out the air pockets the way you smooth tape when you mean it to hold. He set a yellow wet floor caution bucket at the mouth of the administrative corridor as a visual marker for himself. His own sign, reminding him, beyond here, don't breathe, even with the respirator. He walked back to the B2 stairwell the long way. The transmission from the surviving Wave 2 operative logged at 9:31 a.m. read, Wave 2 is down, all 10, atmospheric contamination, source is the ventilation system. Command, the Terran has access to the building's environmental infrastructure. We did not. This was not in the operational profile. The maintenance worker is using the building's cleaning chemicals as a weapon system. We need a revised, the transmission cut. From command, a silence of 3.2 seconds. Then, how many Terrans are in the building? The operative's response. One Terran. The janitor. Another silence. Longer. Then command, in a register that the analyst who transcribed it would later describe as the vocal quality of a senior officer who has for the first time in their career realized they may have made an error in planning. 40 units, 1 Terran janitor. Do you understand what you're telling me? Ray did not hear this either. He had 3 minutes before the chloramine dispersed to sublethal concentration in the upper floor ventilation returns, and he used them. B1. The crawlspace level that did not exist in any station registry because it, like B2, was something he had built himself, running conduit and junction boxes over 18 months of Tuesday afternoons when the school was quiet, contained the building's electrical junction panels. He had consolidated the junction panels there during the renovation because it made inspection easier. He liked things where he could find them. He pulled the main breaker for floors 3 and 4. Primary lighting on both floors died. Emergency lighting activated. The emergency lighting on floors 3 and 4 ran on a separate circuit. It had run on a separate circuit since last year, when Ray had filed a maintenance project under Emergency Egress Lighting Upgrade and rewired it entirely over 2 weekends. Because the original installation put the emergency lights on the same circuit as the fire suppression system, which was, in his professional opinion, a significant design flaw, and which he had corrected without asking anyone's permission because it was his building and he was responsible for it, and no one was going to ask him to do it. His rewiring placed the emergency lights at corridor perimeter level only. The center of every classroom and hallway was dark. Every blind corner was his. He went up, not the main stairwell. The maintenance catwalks, inspection walkways above the dropped ceiling tiles of the academic floors, 18 inches of clearance, rated to 300 pounds, accessible through utility hatches whose locations existed in no document anywhere on the station except in his head. The catwalk smelled of dust and electrical insulation and faintly of the acetone he had spilled up here 2 years ago while running conduit and never quite fully cleaned up. He moved in the dark without sound. He had not moved like this in 6 years, and it came back the way everything comes back. Not gradually, but all at once, as if the body remembers before the mind does. Below him, through the ceiling tiles, he could feel the vibration of the remaining operatives. 17 hertz, subsonic, in the bones of his face. He had learned in the last 20 minutes that the vibration was strongest directly above a cloaked operative. He could triangulate, not precisely. He was not a sensor array. He was a man with old injuries and a body that had been optimized over years to notice things, but well enough. He worked from a utility hatch above a floor 3 corridor where 3 of the vibration sources were converging. A cast iron clean-out plug, 4-inch diameter, 2.4 pounds, dropped through the ceiling tile he had quietly displaced above the lead operative's head. Then, a 40-pound drum of dry floor compound, Hilliard, neutral powder, used for the composite tile maintenance, that he had positioned at the nearest junction before moving to the hatch. Then, a section of conduit pipe, 10 feet, capped at both ends with push-fit covers, filled that morning. He had filled it 2 weeks ago, actually, for a grey water test that he had never fully cleaned up after, which was unlike him. But the station had been busy, with approximately 30 pounds of grey water from the processing system. Capped ends, dense liquid, dropped from 18 inches above a ceiling tile that delivered it to a target that was, below the tile, approximately 8 feet further down. He did not hurry. He was working. He was not an action hero. He was a man who maintained a building and therefore knew precisely what was heavy, where it was stored, and how far it would fall. The transmission from the surviving Floor 3 operative, logged at 9:44 a.m., was the one that Command would later have reconstructed and analyzed 17 times before concluding that no analytical framework they possessed was sufficient to explain it. Command, we cannot. He is in the ceiling. He is in the ceiling above us, and we cannot get an angle, and the cloaking fields are... The building is dark, and he knows where everything is, and we do not. Command, I need to know if this is still a standard operation, because it does not feel like a standard operation anymore. It feels like we are the ones being hunted. The 28th operative found him in the Floor 4 maintenance catwalk access corridor, where he had descended to reposition. It was fast, professional, justified, the single correct response to a threat you have been unable to locate for 18 minutes. The phase shift blade caught him across the left side, entering below the ribs and exiting at the hip, passing through 2 layers of abdominal tissue and nicking the iliac crest. By any standard assessment for any known biological in the Accord, this wound ends the engagement. Ray landed on the catwalk on his good knee. He had, without thinking about it, pivoted, so it was his good knee that took the impact, because his body had been compensating for the reconstructed right knee for so long that avoidance of certain load angles was simply part of how he moved, indistinguishable from reflex, and stayed there for 4 seconds with his left hand pressed flat against the wound. He breathed. He had smelled salt water and diesel sometime in the last 20 minutes. A moment in the chemical storeroom, at some point before the first confrontation, when the ratio of bleach to ammonia in the air had hit some olfactory threshold, and he had been standing very briefly at the harbor in Zamboanga, age 14, watching the fishing boats come in. His father had worked on those boats. He had always found the smell calming, even the diesel. Maybe especially the diesel, because diesel meant an engine, and an engine meant something was moving. He kept moving, because Force Reconnaissance does not produce men who stop when they are hurt. It produces men who stop when the mission is done. The last time he had gone through a building without a floor plan, which was also the last time he had ever been responsible for people in any capacity that involved their lives, the building had not cooperated. The building had had corridors that turned wrong and rooms that were not on the satellite imagery, and 4 men under his coordination had followed his lead and had not come back. He had learned something from that, and the thing he had learned was this: know your building. Know it the way you know your own hands. Know where every drain is, and what everything flows toward, and what happens if you seal the wrong door. He had spent 6 years knowing this building. He moved. The floor 3 East classroom had a door that opened inward, which he had always considered a design flaw in a school setting, because inward opening doors are easier to force from the outside. He had noted this in his 3rd year, and written it up in the maintenance log as a future project. But doors were structural, and structural changes required station approval. And station approval required a submitted plan. And nobody had ever submitted a plan for this door, because it was a school door, and school doors do not typically need to withstand sustained external force. He opened it. He stepped inside. The boy was under his desk, cross-legged, back straight, in the specific posture of a child who has been told at some point how to behave in an emergency and has decided to do exactly that. The classroom was lit only by the emergency perimeter lights, which put the center of the room in shadow and the edges in a thin amber band. The boy looked at him. His eyes were dark, steady, the eyes of a child who had perhaps been in difficult situations before and had developed a particular economy with fear. Ray looked at him. He looked at the rest of the classroom. Empty. One door, the one he had come through. 2 windows, exterior facing, sealed, rated against atmospheric breach. The station's structural windows were all rated against breach, which meant they were also not easily entered from outside. He could hear the vibration again. 2 sources. In the corridor outside. He closed the classroom door. He looked around. He found a chair. A standard academic chair, molded polymer, the kind used on every floor of this building because the station had ordered them in bulk 9 years ago, and the contract included a replacement clause that nobody had ever exercised. He braced it under the door handle, angling the back legs against the floor at the load distribution he knew would hold, because he had tested this once, informally, when he was checking the door's hardware, and a chair braced at the correct angle against an inward opening door will require approximately 340 pounds of sustained force to displace. He did not have a weapon he could lift anymore. He had his body weight, 73 kilos at last, medical, probably less right now given the left side, and the chair and the door, and approximately 4 minutes of consciousness remaining if his blood loss estimate was correct. He positioned himself against the door, back flat, both hands behind him on the frame, and waited. The door was hit from outside. Once, twice, 4 times. The chair held. He held. His left side was a sustained low factual pain that he was not currently paying primary attention to. He had made a triage decision. Triage is a skill, not a feeling. And the primary attention was on the door and on the specific sound of phase shift blade impacts against polymer, and the count of impacts and the intervals, because intervals told you about the operative's positioning and when they were switching off. The boy did not move from under his desk. He was watching Ray with those steady dark eyes. He did not ask questions. "Stay there," Ray said. He said it in standard, which the boy would understand because all students at the Veth-Toran Academy were instructed in standard from enrollment. The boy nodded once. They waited together. The door was hit 7 more times, 11 total. The chair held. Ray held. His vision had started to do the thing it did when blood pressure dropped. A slight reduction in peripheral contrast, a narrowing of the reliable field. But the door was still there, and the chair was still there, and the boy was still under the desk, so his assessment remained the same. Acceptable situation. He heard them before he saw them, the Imperial Guard breaching from above, the particular percussion of military entry charges detonating at roof level, which was distinctive. You did not mistake it for anything else once you had heard it. He had heard it before, in a different context, in a different life, and the sound still moved something in his chest that he did not spend time analyzing. The door impacts stopped. He stayed where he was for another 30 seconds. Then the corridor sounds changed, a different quality of movement, purposeful, organized, the signature of people who know their own floor plan, and he stepped aside from the door. The Imperial Guard commander who opened the classroom door was armed, and professional, and he stopped completely when he saw what was in the room. A child under a desk, unharmed, and a man in a gray custodial uniform sitting against the wall next to him with one hand pressed flat against his left side and an expression of moderate inconvenience on his face, like a man who has found a drain clog but does not yet have the right tool for it. The boy got up from under his desk. He walked to Ray. He sat down next to him, cross-legged, which was, the guard commander would later note in his official report, not the behavior of a child who had just been through what this child had just been through, and he would describe this as the most unnerving thing he witnessed in the entire building, including everything else. Imperial Guard medic Veth Asha Torvel's preliminary assessment was logged at 10:02 a.m. Orvala station time and transmitted to the Imperial Medical Command on the same secure channel used for emergency communications regarding the Dominion's bloodline. The Terran sustained a phase blade wound to the left lateral torso, iliac penetration confirmed, blood loss estimated at 31% of total volume. He continued purposeful, tactical movement for an estimated 19 minutes post-wounding. I have rerun this estimate 4 times. It does not change. Our biological projections for Terran organics placed incapacitation threshold at 12% blood loss. He reached 31%. He was still moving. I have no model for this. She paused. The channel was open. She continued. Human blood clotting response under adrenaline load is 340% faster than a cord average. Human pain tolerance under combat neurochemistry activation is effectively non-functional as a limiting factor. Skeletal and muscular density at this specimen's conditioning level exceeds every Accord species projection by a factor our instruments initially flagged as a calibration error. He was not a calibration error. I am recommending an immediate species reclassification review for all Terran personnel currently employed in non-combat roles at Accord facilities. The guard commander crouched next to Ray as the medics worked on his left side. He was a tall being, Veth, with the formal bearing of someone who had spent their career earning the rank indicated by the arrangement of insignia on their armor. And he crouched with the careful dignity of a person who is used to being the most formidable thing in any room and has just re-evaluated. You protected the prince, he said, in the formal register of the Veth Dominion, which is precise and honorific and does not typically waste syllables. How did you know who he was? Ray's eyes were closing. This was a medical fact rather than a choice. He said without any particular expression, in the tone he used for everything from drain snaking to requisition disputes. I didn't. He stacks his lunch tray neatly. You don't let that kind of kid get hurt. He was unconscious before the commander could respond. 17 days later, Ray woke up in a medical facility that was not on Orvala 7. He lay still for approximately 30 seconds, which was how long it took to complete the inventory. Ceiling, lights, quality of the air, ambient sound, the weight and pull of the tissue scaffold reconstruction on his left side, the specific antiseptic smell of high-grade medical equipment, the sound of a station's artificial gravity cycling. Artificial gravity. He was on a station, not Orvala 7. Different cycling frequency, different gravity signature. He had been moved, while unconscious, to a location he had not chosen. This irritated him considerably. He sat up. A staff member entered and began explaining in rapid, formal Veth, which he understood at conversational level, that he was in the Imperial Medical Annex on Station Keth Orvala 1, that he had been transported here at the Emperor's direct instruction, that his recovery was proceeding ahead of schedule due to factors that the medical staff described with a combination of clinical precision and something that sounded in the formal Veth register very much like unsettled respect. He asked for his uniform. The staff member hesitated. He asked again in the same tone. They brought it. The grey custodial uniform of the Veth Toran Interspecies Academy, cleaned and pressed. The maintenance department patch on the shoulder. The small rectangular name tag that said REY, because the full name had never fit on the standard issue tag. He put it on, carefully because the left side was still a work in progress, but with complete intention, and looked at himself in the reflective surface of the medical monitoring equipment. He looked at the uniform. He decided that was correct. The Accord Administrative Tribunal convened 12 days after that in the secondary chamber of the Orvala Accord Diplomatic Annex, Orvala 7, at 9 a.m. station time. Accord arbitrator Senkal of the Orath delegation was a being of considerable administrative precision and a career built on the correct application of the Accord's Labor Compact statutes, which were extensive, multi-layered, and had been negotiated over 4 decades of painstaking diplomatic work. He stood at the central presentation position with the confident smoothness of a man who had never once been uncertain about the outcome of a proceeding he had initiated, and he presented his argument with technical exactitude. Reynaldo Magpayo was a custodial employee classified under non-combat civilian labor statutes, Accord Designation 7C, custodial and maintenance. His engagement of the Shadow Compact operatives during the Orvala 7 incident on the date in question was outside the scope of his employment authorization under that classification. 3 of the incapacitated Shadow Compact operatives held registrations under the Accord's Guild Compact framework, registered operative designation, which entitled them to labor protections under Statute 12, Section 4, Subclause 9, which specifically prohibited unlicensed interference with a registered guild member's exercise of their contracted function. Magpayo, being unlicensed as a combat operative, had violated this statute. The Orath delegation moved that Magpayo be formally disciplined, reclassified under a temporary suspension pending review, and that the Accord issue a formal apology to the Shadow Compact's registered guild representative for the unlicensed interference with their members' contracted function. Senkal presented this argument with visible satisfaction. He had never been in a room with Reynaldo Magpayo. Ray walked in with the cane. He was using it at the doctor's instruction and against his preference, because his left side was not right yet, and he was, on this single point, taking the advice he had been given. He was wearing the grey custodial uniform, cleaned and pressed, with the Academy maintenance patch on the shoulder and the name tag that said REY. Not a suit. Not dress clothes. He had not brought dress clothes to Orvala 7 and had not sent for any. He sat where the tribunal indicated and looked at arbitrator Senkal with the expression of a man examining a drain clog he has seen in a different form before and finds neither surprising nor interesting. He waited until the tribunal chair completed the formal opening. Then he spoke. He did not open with a statement. He said, "Which one of the 40 guild members was at the floor 3 east classroom door?" Senkal began to respond. Ray said, "I want to know which one, because that's the one that got the closest to the boy. I want to make sure I know which direction that particular door opens." He paused for 3 seconds, which was the length of the pause, and then, "I'm asking because if there's ever a next time, I want to know in advance which maintenance corridor to pre-position myself in, so I'm not improvising." The chamber was quiet. He let it be quiet. "I am a custodial technician," he said. "I am very good at my job. My job is to maintain the building. I maintain the building. If the Accord's labor statutes do not have a category for what I did, I would suggest adding one, because I am not the only Terran working in a non-combat role at an Accord facility right now. There are 340 of us. We all know our buildings. We all know our chemicals. We all know where the electrical panels are." He looked at Senkal. "I am not making a threat. I am providing useful administrative information. You should know what you have. Senkal restructured. He was not a man who was easily moved, and he had a motion on the table and a legal argument that he believed in. He said, with the composure of a career arbitrator, that the Accord could not condone unilateral civilian engagement of registered operatives regardless of circumstances, because the precedent would be destabilizing to the Guild compact framework that undergirded the entire Accord's labor architecture, and that the appropriate response to a threat in a non-combat zone was to shelter and await protective response, not to 40 of them, Ray said. His voice was the same tone it had been the entire time, dry, flat, the Tagalog-accented English of a man from Zamboanga who had spent years in a military culture that valued precision and found that precision was a habit, not a uniform. 9 years old, he stacks his lunch tray. He looked at Senkal. You tell me which part of that math I got wrong and I'll sit here and listen. The room was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet when everyone in them has simultaneously done an arithmetic problem and gotten the same answer. In the observer's gallery, the Emperor's personal representative, a senior Veth official in the formal robes of the Imperial Diplomatic Corps, who had been sitting with the complete stillness of someone who knows the outcome of a proceeding and is waiting for the other participants to arrive at the same place, stood. She formally requested, in the precise language of Accord parliamentary procedure, that Terran civilians employed at all Accord diplomatic facilities be reclassified as embedded protective assets, a legal designation that existed in the Accord's security statutes for situations in which civilian personnel in a protected zone had taken defensive action in the absence of authorized protective forces. The designation retroactively covered the Orvala 7 incident. It prospectively covered anything any Terran in any Accord facility might do in comparable circumstances. The motion was called. It passed. Senkal voted against it. He said nothing else for the remainder of the session. He had not, in his 34-year career, encountered an argument he could not find the procedural counter for. He was discovering that procedural counters were not effective against a man who was asking, in complete seriousness, which direction the classroom door opened. 3 days after the tribunal, a station courier delivered a package to Ray's medical room. He had been moved back to Orvala 7 at his own request, which had required a single, brief, very flat conversation with 3 people in succession, each of whom had concluded that arguing further was not going to produce a different outcome. He was in the medical annex adjacent to the station's transit hub, which was quieter than the main facility and had a window that looked out at the docking array. The package contained a single card, standard assignment paper, the size a school would use for short exercises. It was covered in careful, deliberate handwriting, the handwriting of a 9-year-old who had been taught to write formally and had not yet stopped being formal about it. In standard, with no corrections visible, which meant it had been drafted first and transcribed, which meant the boy had thought about it. Thank you for sitting against the door. I was not scared because you were there. Sorry. Below the text, in the bottom right corner, he had drawn a small picture. A person, rendered in crayon, brown crayon for the skin, grey for the clothing. The figure was holding a mop. The figure had a name tag. The name tag said, Ray. Ray looked at this for a long time. He sat with the card in his hands and looked at it, and it was possible, if you were watching, if you were paying the kind of attention that the boy had apparently been paying for 8 months of lunch periods, that his face did what it rarely did, which was go quiet in a way that had nothing behind it except the thing that was actually there. He folded the card once. He asked the nurse, the Veth nurse who had been assigned to him and had spent 3 days pretending not to be unnerved by the rate at which his wound was healing, which the attending physician had taken to calling, with scientific precision, statistically improbable, for a thumbtack. She brought it. He pinned the card to the wall above his bed, in the center, where he would see it when he woke up. He did not explain this. The Imperial Guard commander came the following morning, formally in full-dress uniform, which was a significant visual event in a standard medical room. He stood at attention while he read, from a document with the Emperor's personal seal, the citation for the Veth Dominion's Veth Asha Order, the highest non-military honor awarded to foreign nationals who had rendered service to the Dominion in the absence of any obligation to do so. He read the entire citation. It took 4 minutes. It contained the phrase, "extraordinary valor in defense of the Imperial bloodline," twice. It described, in the formal language of Imperial citation documents, the events of the incident, and then it described them again in terms of what they meant, and then it described what the Dominion owed, which was, in the formal language, a debt of the kind that does not have a currency. When he finished, he looked at Ray. He had been looking at Ray, at intervals, throughout the reading, with the specific expression of a man who is trying to reconcile what the documents say with what is sitting in a hospital bed in a grey custodial uniform. 40 operatives, he said. He said it in the genuine register, not the formal one. The way people talk when they have run out of the right words and are using the ones they have. No weapons. A school building. How? Ray thought about this. Not a long pause. He was not a man who performed consideration, but a real one. The pause of someone checking whether what they are about to say is accurate. "I've been cleaning that building for 6 years, he said. "I know where every drain is. You know what you find at every drain?" The commander said he did not know. "Everything nobody thinks matters," Ray said. He looked at the window, at the docking array where a transport was completing its approach, running lights yellow and slow in the station dark. He looked at it the way he looked at most things, with the attention of a person for whom looking had always been a professional necessity and had become, over time, simply how he was. "Ask the nurse if there's coffee," he said. The commander asked. There was. In the station archive, in the records of the Keth Soren Shadow Compact, a notation was added to the operational debrief file for the Orvala 7 engagement. It was added by the Guild's own analyst corps, who spent 6 weeks reviewing the incident logs, the medic's biological assessments, and the reconstructed transmission transcripts before producing a final report. The report was classified at the Guild's highest internal tier. Its concluding recommendation read, "The Orvala 7 incident represents an operational failure category not previously catalogued in Guild doctrine. Failure mode is not defensive force, superior armament, or counterintelligence. Failure mode is civilian maintenance personnel with deep structural knowledge of a target facility and a biological threat profile that does not match available species assessment data. Current Guild doctrine designates maintenance and custodial workers as non-threat, non-priority, environmental noise. This designation is based on assessments drawn from species for which this is accurate. Recommend immediate reclassification of all Terran non-combat personnel at Accord facilities to threat assess status. Recommend full facility blueprint acquisition prior to any Accord engagement, including informal renovations, which current intelligence protocols do not capture. Recommend further study of Terran biological resilience under sustained trauma conditions. Recommend, most urgently, if a Terran facility has a janitor, do not enter the building." On the wall above Ray Magpayo's bed, in the Orvala 7 medical annex, next to the hand-drawn card with its small crayon figure holding a mop, there were 2 other things. One was a laminated schedule, his maintenance rotation for the next 6 weeks, which the Academy's administrative coordinator had forwarded to him at his request, because he intended to be back by Tuesday and wanted to know what was backlogged. The other was a photograph of Lucia Bautista, age 3, in a dress with yellow flowers that he had found in his jacket pocket after waking up in the Imperial medical facility, not knowing how it had gotten there, and then remembering that he had been carrying it for 6 years in the front inner pocket, where it had stayed through the inventory and the chemicals and the catwalk and the door. He had not been able to do what Ephraim asked him to do, which was bring everyone back. He had not been able to do that. He had never stopped not being able to do that. But a 9-year-old boy somewhere in an Imperial medical facility whose location he did not know had sat next to him under a classroom door that was being hit from outside and had not been scared. Because he was there. He had learned something from Kandahar. He had learned to know the building. He looked at the maintenance schedule. He had a list. Backlogged drain descaling on floor 2. A ceiling tile on floor 4 that he had displaced and not replaced. Some conduit work on B1 that had been interrupted. He had work to do. He asked the nurse to bring his clipboard.